For this week's Songs of Praise, Alan Titchmarsh visits Warrington, where many believe in the desire for reconciliation. Songs of Praise on Remembrance Sunday in 15 minutes. On BBC One Now, the news with Maurice Stewart at 5.5 minutes past 6.
UN troops move in to protect hundreds of mental hospital patients caught on the front line in central Bosnia. Staff have fled the fighting between Croats and Muslims, leaving the patients to look after themselves. The former Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath, tells the government to stop attacking single mothers. And as the Queen honours Britain's war dead in Whitehall, the Princess of Wales says a prayer for peace at Enniskillen in Northern Ireland. Good evening. In central Bosnia, United Nations troops have moved in to protect more than 500 mentally ill patients at 2 hospitals caught on the front line between Muslim and Croat forces. They're at Vojnica, a town now held by the mainly Muslim government forces. But it's under attack from the Croats and appears likely to fall. The staff have fled, leaving the patients to run the 2 hospitals themselves.
The road out is no more than a goat track in places, and a fall of snow on the high ground was the last thing they needed. But by the time we reached Vojnica, the civilians had all fled. All except these, trapped in 2 hospitals half a mile apart, the front line between Muslims and Croats shifting around them. Those at Bakovici are worst off. 367 long-term psychiatric patients, more than half of them bedridden, have no electricity, no water and now no staff. What they do have is a handful of Canadian and Danish troops, principally there to provide military protection and turning their hands to psychiatric nursing.
It's hard to come here and not be able to help. We need some treatment of some kind, and we haven't got no experience with these kind of disabled people.
At nightfall, even the UN withdraws. The patients are left locked up and alone throughout the hours of darkness. It is bitterly cold. At dawn, they go back. The morning bread delivery needs an armoured escort. Its arrival is the start of a remarkable exercise in self-help by those normally considered to be utterly dependent. The hospital is on the front line and the staff have fled, leaving the patients to fend for themselves. In effect, they have taken control of their own hospital and their own fate. The kitchen still works. Zora Kovacevic runs it. She's been a patient for 6 years. She sees that the bedridden get fed. As well as they can, they take care of each other. But there is no medical help. This woman was 70 years old and she died in the night. The Canadians buried her beside the graves of 30 others, filled these last few weeks. It is an image that challenges conventional notions. If there is madness in Vojnica, it is not in Bakovici Hospital. It is on the street. Gangs of young Croatian men are already roaming this part of town. Their final push is about to begin. Alan Little, BBC News, Vojnica.
Here, the former Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath, has attacked John Major's Back to Basics policy drive. And in a BBC interview, he said the idea that benefits to single parents might be cut had been thought up by dogmatists with no understanding of humanity.
Single mothers have become the focus of some ministerial speeches which have highlighted the apparent social and economic costs of the decline in family values. Lone parents were also the subject of a leaked cabinet document which explored cutting the costs of supporting them. But some senior Conservatives see little economic gain and are alarmed by the tone being adopted.
Any idea that single mothers are all set out to get social security benefits by having as many babies as they can and having no husbands, it's really so removed from reality. It could only have been put forward by dogmatists who have no understanding of humanity.
But a right-wing contributor to the Back to Basics agenda rejects the charge.
What's dogmatic is to think that the state should just hand over the money, no questions asked. The fact is that the welfare state is a very powerful instrument. It can do enormous good, it can help people, but equally it can do harm. And what the Prime Minister is opening up is a debate about how we make sure that the welfare state helps people and doesn't create dependency.
It's been ministers on the right who've been largely responsible for generating the current Conservative debate. John Redwood, with his attack on the trend for women to have babies with no intention of marriage, and Peter Lilly, who pleased activists by pointing out that the number of lone parents had risen dramatically. But one of their colleagues warns of the practical limitations arising from social policy.
Governments have got a duty to say what they think about these issues, even in areas where they cannot have very much influence directly through policy. I mean, we cannot in the end legislate to make people good and not commit crime. We cannot in the end legislate to make people stay together and not split asunder marriages.
Mr. Major is anxious that his Back to Basics theme isn't derailed by a row over single parents. In a speech tomorrow, he'll highlight education and anti-crime measures instead. But the opposition see his whole enterprise as being at odds with actual policies or an attempt to disguise their failure. Steve Richards, BBC News.
The CBI President, Sir Michael Angus, has warned the Chancellor not to do anything in his budget at the end of the month to endanger the economic recovery. He was speaking ahead of the CBI's annual conference, which begins in Harrogate tomorrow.
The business community has come to Harrogate bearing a substantial list of demands from a government many here blame for failing to deliver strong, sustained recovery. CBI data released today shows stagnant investment and exports. Tomorrow the Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke, arrives a fortnight from his first budget. He'll confront insistent calls for a reduction in the tax burden on industry and strict controls on public spending.
It's a very important budget for us. If there is any foolhardiness here, any heavy-handedness, we could start to dampen the recovery that is already coming about.
Throwing further fuel onto the debate on government European policy, business people surveyed by the CBI voiced overwhelming support for European currency union. 80% favour the single currency, which the Prime Minister has described as an irrelevance.
I think the time has come where we've got to stop all this fluctuation in currencies within the common market. I export something like 30% of our product, we employ over 1,400 people, and I have to gamble continually on marks, on pesetas, on francs, what's going to happen.
Yet CBI support for Europe has strict limits. 2/3 of members describe its social legislation as harmful. Tomorrow, Jacques Delors, president of the reviled European Commission, arrives in town. He can expect a frosty welcome. Peter Morgan, BBC News in Harrogate.
Thousands of ex-servicemen have attended the Remembrance Day service and parade at the Cenotaph in Whitehall. The Queen and other members of the royal family led the commemoration 75 years after the First World War.
On a bleak and blustery morning, veterans from the wars that have scarred this century gathered to remember their fallen comrades. The Queen led the nation in paying tribute to all those who laid down their lives for their country. Watching from a balcony, the Queen Mother, who was joined by the Princess Royal, the Duke of Gloucester and the Princess's husband, Commander Lawrence. As the clock struck 11, signalling the start of 2 minutes silence, thoughts turned in this anniversary year to those who died in the First World War, which ended 75 years ago. The Queen laid the first of many wreaths of poppies to be placed at the foot of the cenotaph. For Prince Charles, it was a sombre start to his 45th birthday. The Prime Minister laid a wreath on behalf of the government before joining other dignitaries to watch a march past by some 10,000 men and women who have served Britain in conflicts around the world. For these, the battle is long over, but for the British troops with the UN peacekeeping force in Bosnia, there was an extra dimension to their Remembrance Day service. As gunfire crackled around their base on the edge of Gornji Bakuf, they paid tribute not only to the dead of 2 world wars, but to their own comrade, Lance Corporal Wayne Edwards, who was killed while serving there last January. Jenny Bond, BBC News.
The Princess of Wales has paid an unexpected visit to Northern Ireland to attend a Remembrance Day service at Enniskillen. It's exactly 6 years ago that an IRA bomb killed 11 people there.
At the Cenotaph in Enniskillen, the Princess of Wales led the Remembrance Day ceremony. She stood to observe the 2-minute silence a few yards from the spot where the IRA exploded a bomb 6 years ago, killing 11 people. Her wreath was first on behalf of the nation. And amongst a score of local tributes, that of Gordon Wilson, who lost his daughter Mari in the Remembrance Day bombing. Then at a riverside garden, a cross-community gathering of children for a gesture of reconciliation.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.
The children, with a little encouragement, and the princess planted daffodil bulbs as a symbol of hope. There were remembrance services throughout Northern Ireland, and at one in Belfast, 3-month-old Lauren Baird was christened. Her grandparents will bring her up, for Lauren lost her mother, father and sister in the Shankill Road bombing last month. Kate Adie, BBC News, Belfast.
In New York, the FBI have said that 3 men who've been charged in connection with one of America's biggest robberies all have links with the IRA. $7 million was stolen at an armoured car depot last January. Much of the money is still missing.
They've recovered about half of the stolen money, and though the FBI say 3 of the arrested men have IRA connections, they can't say whether the robbery was intended for IRA funds. Patrick Maloney, an Irish priest, here in a courtroom drawing, was once arrested in Dublin suspected of arms smuggling, but never prosecuted. Samuel Miller is said to have served 6 years in an Irish jail for explosives and weapons offences. Thomas O'Connor, an ex-policeman, was employed as a guard by the armoured car company. He claims the raiders abducted him. His lawyer says he's an innocent victim.
He was robbed. He was part of the group that was in there who were robbed. He was terrorized that night.
But the FBI say O'Connor was active in NORAID, an organisation often accused of IRA fundraising.
Probably the most important development in this process came in August, when surveillance teams began to observe a growing relationship between Miller and Maloney, and developed information that Maloney, in June 1993, had purchased a $26,000 Ford Explorer with $20 bills.
NORAID has denied any connection with the robbery here at the depot, and Sinn Féin, the IRA's political wing, says the allegations are cynical propaganda. Gary Lloyd, BBC News.
Authorities in the Ukrainian capital Kiev say that life in the city is continuing normally, despite a religious cult's prediction that the world would end today.
St. Sophia Square. Here, said the Great White Brotherhood, the world would come to a fiery end. But the militia were out in force. At the appointed hour, cult followers were easily outnumbered. And wherever 1 or 2 gathered together, they were promptly cleared off the streets. For many, the final day of judgment proved to be one they'd rather forget. Filmed by Ukrainian police, extremists occupied St. Sophia Cathedral. At their head, their own living god, Maria Devi Christos. She was arrested and charged with hooliganism along with her disciples in the brawl that followed. What most worried the authorities here was the number of youngsters attracted to the Brotherhood. This 12-year-old, like so many others, had run away from home to join the cult. At regular news briefings, city leaders warned of possible outbreaks of violence. The Interior Minister promised all necessary measures would be taken to maintain order. Now it seems Ukraine has seen the back of the Great White Brotherhood.
With the cult leaders safely behind bars, the authorities here are confident that the end of the world has been aborted. The party's over, they say, and life can now get back to normal. Lawrence McDonnell, BBC News, Kiev.
In the main news tonight, 10 to 9.
Good evening. I'm not sure about the world ending, but parts of it nearly got blown away today. We had winds of up to 80 miles an hour along the east coast, for instance. That was due to that particular area of low pressure. That's moving off into the continent. High pressure means quieter weather for most of us. Masses of isobars out to the west, so we will have gales back again later tomorrow. So there are those strong winds still affecting the eastern coast. They're going to last through the night. Then we have this quieter patch. And then we have strong south to southwesterly winds picking up late in the night and through tomorrow. This time it's a turn of Northern Ireland and much of Scotland. So it is going to be fairly windy along that east coast. That'll hold the temperatures up, continue to bring in 1 or 2 showers as well. But with light winds elsewhere, the odd sort of misty patch. But more importantly, as those skies clear and the winds drop light, it is going to end up quite cold. There'll be a widespread frost. Temperatures across Northern Ireland may well drop below freezing, but later in the night as that wind picks up and brings in some cloud too, come to that, you'll find those temperatures rising again. Tomorrow for England and Wales, a very different day. It's going to be dry, it's going to be bright, a good deal of sunshine as well. Quite bright over much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but wind and rain never very far away. In fact, the rain's going to get into Northern Ireland and Western Scotland by the end of the morning, spreading across the rest of Scotland and Northern Ireland probably in the afternoon. Temperatures, though, climbing back up to about normal.
This Sunday on BBC One, romance is not dead. It's just getting on a bit, as a liaison for Howard turns out to be more dangerous than expected and ignites an old flame. Lovejoy is the fairground attraction at 7:30 when Charlie is taken for a ride.
That's not a Picasso.
It is to me. Size is everything in Birds of a Feather at 8:20.
You know what they say, big nose.
Big handkerchief.
Then at 9:05, one man's lust for power, the final conflict, Scarlet and Black.
To arms. If you cannot retreat, you must advance.
Entertainment for Sunday evening on BBC One.
And now on BBC One, Songs of Praise for Remembrance Sunday comes from Warrington with Alan Titchmarsh.